Before I begin the reading and the sermon, I want to acknowledge some thank yous. First, I want to thank Bob Freeman, who's the sound guy today, but who is so much more to this congregation, who really was sort of a research associate on this sermon because he gave me some materials from our archives about DC Emancipation Day, which I'll share during the sermon. And I also want to just dedicate the sermon this morning to Loretta Carter Haynes, who is a member of this congregation, but who hasn't been to church in quite some time due to illness herself and in her family, but who in 1991 really led the struggle to make DC Emancipation Day what it is, which is a fully acknowledged, at least at the DC level, holiday tomorrow. If it weren't for her work, we wouldn't really be recognizing the significance of DC emancipation. So this is for Loretta, wherever she is this morning. This morning's reading is a slight adaptation from a meditation by colleague Reverend Victoria Safford in one of my favorite little meditation manuals by her. It's entitled Walking Toward Morning. Both the meditation manual and this meditation are called Walking Toward Morning. You know, we do it every day. Every morning we go out blinking into the glare of our freedom, into the wilderness of work and the world, making maps as we go, looking for signs that we are on the right path. And on some good days, we walk right out of our oppressions, those things that press down on us from the outside, or as often from the inside. We shake off the shackles of fear, prejudice, timidity, closed-mindedness, selfishness, self-righteousness, and claim our freedom outright, terrifying as it is. Our freedom to be human and humane. Every morning, every day, we leave our houses not knowing if it will be for the last time, and we decide what we'll take with us, what we'll carry, how much integrity, how much truth-telling, how much compassion in case somebody along the way may need some, how much anger, how much humor, how much willingness to change and be changed, to grow and be grown, how much faith and hope, how much love and gratitude. You pack these with your lunch, with your date book and your papers. Every day, we gather what we think we'll need, pick up what we love and all that we so far believe. We put on our history, shoulder our experience and memory, take inventory of our blessings. And we start walking toward morning. This morning, we are both celebrating and honoring a momentous occasion in the District of Columbia's history. And we will also take some time to ruminate on the ways in which freedom and its lack still impact our lives to this day. Impact, if you will, how much some of us are able to walk toward morning as much as we would like. As I began writing this week, it occurred to me that freedom is sort of hard to pin down as a subject matter because it's both existential and abstract. How do you talk about freedom? But it's also, in some odd way, exceedingly present, exceedingly clear in our day-to-day living, whether we feel free or not. What does it mean to be free? And how much of freedom, as Victoria Safford points out, comes from without, from outside of ourselves? How much freedom is bestowed upon us by others and by the law? And how much has everything to do with our own daring, our own capacity and willingness to embrace what we can change in effect in our own lives? How much, friends, do we still need emancipation 145 years after President Lincoln freed the slaves? So my sermon this morning is many paths to freedom, and I suppose in a way, if you're counting the paths this morning, there's the historical, the societal, and the personal. So I'll start with the historical. I didn't know until I moved to Washington almost 4 years ago now that DC's story of emancipation is slightly separate and yet interwoven with the national story of the emancipation of slaves. For you see, on April 16th in 1862, President Lincoln freed the slaves of the District of Columbia, about 3,100 people to be exact, almost 9 months before he issued the Emancipation Proclamation that freed all slaves in this budding nation. So 9 months earlier, almost, the slaves of the District of Columbia were freed. It's interesting because as I read some of the materials that Bob gave me, it was interesting to see that Lincoln himself had been torn and conflicted about how to handle slavery. You see, he was personally opposed to it on moral grounds for quite some time. And he had tried when he was a congressman in 1849, so 1849 to 1862, to introduce a bill that would bring sort of a gradual emancipation to slaves. He was torn. He wanted to do what was right, what he felt was right in his own conscience, in his own soul. And yet he knew that what was politically expedient, what was possible in the political realm that he was in at the time, to best hold the Union together was not to push for emancipation. But he decided when 1862 came around that he could start with the immediate in the slave realm. He could start with the District of Columbia. He could start with where he was located. Because the scourge of slavery was unavoidable then. African Americans were being bought and sold in the streets of our city. They were led through the town in chains. And so it was hard not to decide, as Lincoln finally did, to begin the emancipation process with those who were closest to him, with his immediate surroundings. He decided if he couldn't change it all at once, as he wanted to, he could start with those that he saw around him in the streets each day. And because of that beginning, history has been altered irrevocably. And yet we still have this niggling sense, I think, that true and deep and lasting freedom has remained elusive. So now to the societal path of freedom and its connection to this historical story in which we are living and moving and having our being. Those of you who were here when I preached a month ago remember my mentioning a wheel of life. Remember my mentioning U.T. Saunders, a gentleman who is doing some facilitation and work that I'm doing at our denominational level. And I told you that in his theory, I don't think it's UT's theory, but it's the one he shared with us about the wheel of life, that in our living, if we're lucky, we go around this circle 3 times. From 0 to 28, we are in our adolescence. From 28 to 56, we are in our intelligent individual phase where we've come to know who we are and we're living out our lives in that sense of individuality, and I suppose hopefully in freedom. And then if we're fortunate enough to get that last go-round in life, from 56 to 84, we attain some wisdom. Some of you laughed last time when I said wisdom has already arrived for some of you. You're not sure you're quite there yet, but in the wheel of life, you're already wise. Well, what I didn't tell you about the wheel of life is that through it run 2 axes, according to UT, an axis of power and an axis of consciousness. UT likes to tell us that as long as you're perpendicular to the ground, you have power. As long as you are upright, you have power and you have consciousness. You have the ability to choose. You have the ability to be responsible. As he likes to say, you have respondability. And so if you believe that psychological theory, then we are all free in that sense. We all have power and consciousness to make choices in our lives, to respond to the circumstances that life brings our way. In this view, it is our birthright to stake our claim to living the life that we have been given. We are all free in the sense that we each have the capacity to chart a path through our days. And yet, as simple and as lovely and as wonderful and as true as that can be sometimes, we all know, we are not naive enough not to know, that that path, that fate that we find ourselves in has already been shaped and moved by forces beyond our control and choosing. That shape and path is connected to race and to class and to ethnicity, and that in turn shapes things like educational and job opportunities, that there are aspects of our existence that were given to us by virtue of the family we were born into, and that we have been channeled ever since along courses that are for some of us easier and more navigable than the paths of others. You see, we know the realities of our lives tell us that freedom is not just for us to decide, that other people have something to say about our freedom, that sometimes we are bestowed or granted or feel that we earn or gain freedom by virtue of who we are. And the politics of race and class make it still true in 2007 that some of us are more free than others. And sadly, it is still the case that skin color or the amount of money that one has in one's bank account directly affect the odds of whether each of us will have that opportunity to choose. We may be perpendicular to the ground, and we may have consciousness and power, but the amount of power is still determined by so much more that we didn't choose. So we struggle still for greater freedom. We struggle still to be able to really chart a course that is true and real and authentic to who we know ourselves to be. And we struggle still in this city to find ways to allow those who are on the margins, whose power and consciousness is not as strong as others, to speak for themselves. Just this week, that whole furor about Don Imus and what he said or didn't say and who gets to say reminded us all once again of the difference between what white folks get to say, what black folks get to say, and who gets to decide what is true and real about someone else's life, about someone else's lived experience. And it saddens me that we're still in a place in our world where too often white folks get to speak for what black folks and other folks of color might think is true or real. This is what they want. Or that men get to speak for what women might want, or that other people get to say, as your advocate, I can speak for you. Perhaps we do need still for them to make them hear you. I appreciate the song this morning, because we can't speak for anyone else. So when it comes to freedom, friends, what does that mean? What does it mean to be truly free? What are the freedoms that feminism and civil rights and economic justice movements have been working for? Perhaps that's the final frontier of freedom, finding a way to be in solidarity with those who are on the margins and on the edges, but not tokenizing or reinforcing some sort of lesser than mentality, some sort of patronizing, allow me to help you mentality. For it seems to me there is a path to freedom that must be shared, but not at the expense of anyone's full humanity. We must all, in that meditation's mindset, be able to shoulder our own backpacks, walk toward morning, each in our own ways, with our memories and our grace and our beauty and our anger and our humor, and that none of us get to tell anyone else what they're bringing with them. Full humanity. Is that freedom? You see, I think maybe that's where we're headed in freedom. That the history of this nation, and by extension, the current state of our own cultural, societal realm, tends to still set boundaries and limits around what is possible for each of us. We take those things that have been told to us about who we are supposed to be inside. We internalize everything that says no, and we think, maybe I'm not allowed to be that person that I think I am. We have become so habituated to what maleness is and blackness is and whiteness is. We've become so habituated that we are now living smaller lives. We have shrunk ourselves to fit someone else's definition. We have confined our sense of liberty to what is easiest and most convenient, the ways in which we can get along and get by. We have bought into the stereotypes and the images that are handed to us so completely that we are sometimes unable to see where we end and where the projections begin. I think you know what I mean. Those projections, what they are, that all African American folks are not as innately intelligent as white folk. Hence, it's surprising that Barack Obama is articulate. This many years after Zora Neale Hurston stood on a street corner with a little measurement trying to measure people's skulls, trying to say that we're just like each other, we still don't believe it. We still believe in some way that all men are hardwired to be stoic, if not prone to violence. and that all women are given to emotional whims and outbursts, that the books of feminism trying to counter all these hysterical notions of who women are. The list of projections and ideas and stereotypes and images go on and on and on, and I don't need to catalog them for you. Friends, it's clear that we can be given a certain amount of freedom, but at some point we will be forced and pushed to claim even more if it is ever to become true that we are whole and true and real selves that are something more and something other than these images that we've been handed. And yet we don't claim that additional freedom. We don't take that next step. And there are so many reasons for this, of course. Some have to do with self-esteem, the regard that we have for ourselves. Maybe we don't believe we deserve that much freedom. And others have to do with our lack of willingness to imagine something beyond the conventional, beyond those stereotypical images that we have seen thus far, the images that we have been given. We have to be willing to go more broadly and more deeply. And so I think this additional claiming of freedom is where our community comes in. It's where All Souls comes in. It's where faith comes in. For faith, it is said, is a belief and a conviction that there are things unseen that can nonetheless be hoped for. That persistence in faith has led to so much change in our world. It's what led Lincoln to assign that proclamation so long ago. It's what led South Africans to chant that freedom is coming. That somehow, yes, they knew it was coming, even in the midst of apartheid. Faith not just in something greater than one single human being, but in the strength of community, the strength of connections to define and redefine ourselves, the enduring wisdom that says to us each that nothing and no one is set or fixed in one place and can never be moved. Change is inevitable. So why not put our efforts in the direction of positive, life-affirming, and oppression-denying change? So that's my prayer for us this Emancipation Sunday. That we may know that freedom is indeed coming when we affirm others in our community's potential to change, to be in ways that are not conventional but are authentic. May we know that freedom takes many forms. Forms that have to do with freedom of expression, freedom to be whole selves that are not confined to anyone else's preconceived definition of what it means to be alive. May we, my friends, create space for each and every person in this sanctuary to find freedom in our midst, in this life, and on this planet. So may it be.